February 2026. Dawn had not yet broken over Tehran when Washington lit up with a single headline: Iran suspected in the assassination of a U.S. officer in Syria. No official evidence, but Trump didn't need proof. Wars don't wait for proof, he declared on Truth, his own social platform, less than 2 hours after the incident. Under pressure from hawkish advisors, he called for a punitive coalition. First demand force Iranian President Imbrahim al-Salim to choose a side. Imbrahim, hailed as the new voice of Middle Eastern reason, was suddenly the focal point of the most volatile crisis in post-Trump politics. He was no puppet. A theologian once imprisoned by Iran's own regime, once exiled Imbrahim, returned to politics to reform, not to serve Western or Eastern masters. But Trump didn't want diplomacy, he wanted allegiance. "You're either with me or you drown with the Houthis," he said through a secure channel. Tehran had 24 hours to respond. No press briefings, no official statements. Only a secret meeting behind sealed doors at the United Nations headquarters. War hadn't begun, but its breath was already on humanity's neck. And now all eyes turned to one man, Imbrahim. Would he bow, or would he do the unthinkable? The Manhattan wind sliced like a blade. Inside the dimly lit United Nations building, a numberless conference room in the lowest level had been sealed off since dawn. No flags, no recording devices, no interpreters, just 3 men. Donald Trump sat at the center, a figure accustomed to launching wars with a tweet. His eyes burned cold. To his left, John Barron, a rising security advisor, dubbed Dick Cheney without the disguise. Across the table, dressed in a modest charcoal suit, sat Ibrahim, silent, composed. But his gaze met Trump's like ice against flame. Trump wasted no time. "Imbrahim, if you want to save Iran from becoming the next Mosul, you shake my hand, now." Imbrahim didn't respond. He opened his leather briefcase and placed a document on the table, the U.S. Constitution. Trump narrowed his eyes. "I brought this to remind you that it forbids any president from declaring war without congressional approval." Trump sneered. "And yet I've broken that law more than once and still sat in that chair." "Know why?" Barron leaned forward. "Because we have what you don't, Imbrahim, leverage." Ibrahim's voice was calm, almost too quiet. "Iran will not be a pawn in your campaign. I will not lead my nation into war for your re-election optics." Trump slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the silence. "Don't delude yourself into thinking you're some heroic sage. Do you think the Middle East needs another philosopher or a leader who knows when to seize the moment? If you refuse me now, I have the power, the narrative, the media, and the allies. You don't have the people," Imbrahim said coolly, "and you certainly don't have a conscience." The air went dead. Barron shot up from his seat and threw a dossier onto the table. "Maybe you should look through this before preaching conscience." Inside were satellite images, financial trails, and internal memos suggesting alleged ties between Iran's paramilitary factions and officials close to Ibrahim's administration. A threat or a trap? Imbrahim studied the pages without flinching. Then his voice turned colder. "So this is your goal, to force me to disown my own people, and once my nation turns against me, you'll install a compliant puppet, one willing to lead them into war." Trump smiled faintly. "I don't need to install anyone. I just need you to self-destruct right here, right now." Imbrahim stood slowly. "I'm not refusing you, Donald. I'm refusing the insult." He turned and walked out, leaving a silence thicker than before. Barron punched the wall in frustration. Trump folded his arms, eyes locked on the door that had just closed. "Then, we prepare for phase 2. The moment Imbrahim left the room, the gears of escalation began to turn. Trump stormed out through the VIP exit beneath the UN building, his jaw locked, his fingers twitching for a phone. Within minutes, the post appeared on Truth: Iran refuses to stand against terror. Weak leaders create dead soldiers. America will act with or without permission. It lit the internet on fire. Fox News, already cued by Barron's media team, flooded the evening slot with ominous graphics of Iranian missiles and red-circled satellite imagery. Headlines screamed, "New axis of evil Iran-Hezbollah," and the silence of Imbrahim. Talk shows buzzed with anger, flags waved on set and behind closed doors. Military contractors watched stock prices soar. Ibrahim returned to his quarters at the Iranian diplomatic residence, a fortified building with eyes on every street corner. His security chief handed him a phone. "It's Tehran." On the other end was General Rahimi, head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. His voice was sharp. "Mr. President, what did you say to him?" "I told him we would not bend." Silence. Then restrained fury. Then prepare for consequences. Not from America, from within. Ibrahim's shoulders tightened. "You threaten me?" "No," Rahimi said. "I warn you. The moment missiles fly, and they will, the clerics will ask for your head. You speak of reform, but reform dies in war. If you don't align with the Guard, we may not protect you when this begins." Imbrahim ended the call. He stood by the window. The city lights of New York pulsed beneath him. Somewhere down there, a protest had already formed. Iranian Americans waving signs, both for and against him. One banner read, "No more puppets, no more martyrs." His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anger. Across the globe, the chessboard moved. In Tel Aviv, Israel raised its alert level. In Riyadh, the Saudis called an emergency cabinet session. In Washington, Congress buzzed with speculation. Ro Khanna, standing shoulder to shoulder with Bernie Sanders, announced their formal objection. No war without congressional vote. Trump dismissed them publicly. They're traitors. You don't let traitors decide when to defend freedom. Backroom negotiations went dark. Diplomats who hours before were smiling over lunch now whispered about evacuation plans. A NATO ally leaked classified chatter U.S. bombers were already mobilizing to Diego Garcia. The countdown had begun. At 03:00 New York time, Imbrahim called a press conference, but there were no cameras. Just a single microphone, dim lighting, and a live audio stream. He spoke calmly, but his words cut through steel. "To the people of the world, I say, this Iran will not wage war to satisfy the ego of a man desperate for legacy. We will not be baited into bloodshed. And if war is declared on us, we will defend ourselves, but we will not start it." The stream went viral. Young people in Berlin and Istanbul projected his words onto embassy walls. In Washington, anti-war protests blocked traffic on Constitution Avenue. But inside the Pentagon, Barron grinned. "He gave us what we needed," he said. "He'll look defiant. We'll make him look like a liar." That same night, a drone strike hit a convoy near the Iran-Iraq border. 7 dead. Among them, a mid-level Revolutionary Guard commander. Iran blamed the U.S. Trump denied involvement, but the strike matched American drone signatures. The world held its breath. Imbrahim was advised to retaliate. The Guard demanded it. He refused. Instead, he delivered a chilling directive to his aides: leak the Barron file. What file? Imbrahim turned his eyes colder than ever. The one where he plotted to fabricate evidence of Iranian collaboration with Hezbollah. Leak it to Al Jazeera, then The Guardian. Let them tear the narrative apart. It worked. Within 12 hours, The Guardian published internal U.S. intelligence memos. Whistleblower confirmed, indicating that Barron's team doctored imagery and intercepted comms to justify aggression. The headline roared across the world, "War Fraud." The backlash was immediate. Senators demanded hearings. European allies froze military cooperation. Barron went silent, and Trump, for once, hesitated. But Imbrahim knew. This pause would not last. Inside Iran, the real danger was only beginning. Protests erupted. Some hailed Imbrahim as a hero. Others called him a coward. Clerics whispered of impeachment. Rahimi moved troops to the capital for security. The interior minister resigned. At night, Imbrahim slept 2 hours under guard reading reports of potential coups, of assassination plots, of religious decrees, preparing to label him Murtad apostate. Yet each morning he stood firm, appearing before the Iranian public, speaking of peace, with a fire no bullet could extinguish. In the White House, Trump stared at a silent room. Barron stood by the fireplace, pale. "He's still standing," Trump muttered. "After all that." "Barely," Barron replied. "But if we wait, if he regains control," Trump interrupted, voice low but deadly, "then we move faster." The clock now ticked, not toward war, but toward something darker: regime change, sabotage, information warfare, and perhaps something no one dared name aloud. But in Tehran, one man still stood between two worlds: tradition and reform, fury and diplomacy refusing to bow. Imbrahim had not won, but he had not fallen. Not yet. The rain fell heavy over Tehran. Each drop, sharp and cold, pounded the pavement of the presidential compound, like a drumbeat of the coming storm. Inside, the hallways were nearly silent. No aides, no ministers, only shadows and the occasional flicker of flickering security monitors. Imbrahim sat alone in his war room. A cup of untouched tea grew cold on the table. Before him, 3 folders. 1. Orders for mobilization. 2. Drafts of resignation. 3. Emergency powers decree. Each path led to ruin. Mobilization would ignite the war Trump craved. Resignation would hand Iran to the clerics and Rahimi's military junta. Emergency powers might save reform or destroy it with the weight of authoritarianism. He closed the folders. Outside, thunder rumbled. His bodyguard entered silently. "There's movement in Parliament. A special session's been called for tomorrow. They may try to invoke Article 88, vote of no confidence." Imbrahim nodded. "Let them. They could remove you. They can try." Meanwhile, the noose tightened around Washington. The leaked documents from Barron's office now dominated global media. Allies distanced themselves. A bipartisan group of senators demanded Barron resign. Thousands marched across U.S. cities with signs that read, "Not in our name, stop the lies, let Congress decide." But the machine kept turning. Barron, though wounded, had already shifted tactics. With Trump's approval, he initiated a covert operation, Project Fireglass, a multi-pronged campaign of misinformation, black ops, and targeted sabotage inside Iran. Its goal: destabilize Ibrahim's support, just enough to break his government and replace him with a more manageable alternative. The CIA had its doubts, the Pentagon was split, but Trump overrode everyone. "He thinks he's above me." Trump snarled in a closed meeting, "Let's see how long he stays on that throne." But Imbrahim was not done. The next day, he entered Parliament alone, without guards, without aides. The chamber buzzed with whispers. Clerics, generals, and career politicians stared at him like vultures circling a dying lion. He took the podium. "For 2 weeks you've questioned my loyalty. You've questioned my refusal to lead us into another war. You say I am weak. You say I do not love Iran enough to strike first." He looked at each of them, then slowly raised a black envelope. "This," he said, "contains a plan authored by Rahimi and approved by foreign actors to assassinate opposition leaders, fabricate attacks, and drag Iran into war under the guise of defense." Gasps filled the chamber. "I refuse, not because I am a pacifist, but because I believe in a nation ruled by law, not fear. I will not let our sons and daughters bleed for the ambitions of men who hide in bunkers." A voice from the back cried, "You are alone." No, Imbrahim answered, "I am unafraid." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, a few members stood. Then more. Clerics hesitated. Some crossed their arms, but no one spoke. No one moved to remove him. The vote was delayed. He had bought time, but time was dangerous. That night, an explosion rocked the Ministry of Communications. 2 dead, dozens injured. Saboteurs armed with foreign gear had breached the servers. Information warfare had begun. in the U.S. Project Fireglass was denied rogue agents, Trump claimed. But the trail pointed elsewhere. And while deniability shielded Trump from impeachment, the public rage was growing. The American people were not silent. United Against War trended for 11 days straight. Imbrahim's audio speech was broadcast during a live concert in Los Angeles. Donations poured into grassroots campaigns, calling for a War Powers Act revival. A week later, the House passed a historic resolution, no U.S. military action in Iran, without congressional vote. It passed the Senate 2 days later. Trump fumed. Traitors, he hissed. But even the hawks in his party were turning. Election season was close, and war, it turned out, didn't poll well. In Tehran, Imbrahim returned to the people. He walked among them in an open-air bazaar without protection. Cameras followed him, but he didn't speak to them. He spoke to bakers, to schoolchildren, to an old soldier who lost a leg in the last U.S. conflict. "Don't let them trick you into loving war," he said. "War makes kings of cowards and graves of the brave." An old woman grasped his hand. "You're not safe here, my son." Imbrahim smiled faintly. "Then it is the right place to be." Weeks passed. No bombs fell. No troops crossed borders. Trump shifted his attention to domestic issues. Barron resigned for personal reasons. Imbrahim's enemies retreated, waiting for another opportunity. But reform crept forward again, slowly, painfully, like a sprout in winter. There was no declaration of victory, only silence. Only a breath of relief that the world had for now stepped back from the abyss. In his final televised address before stepping down a year later, Imbrahim spoke to the nation, "History will not remember me as a hero, nor as a coward. It may not remember me at all. But if it remembers one thing, let it be this, that I said no when it mattered most." The story of President Imbrahim and his confrontation with Donald Trump is not merely a fictional geopolitical drama. It is a profound reflection on leadership, moral integrity, and the cost of refusing to compromise under pressure. It teaches us that in moments of extreme political volatility, the most courageous act a leader can perform is not to strike first, but to stand firm in the face of threats, manipulations, and overwhelming odds. Imbrahim's choice not to yield to Trump's ultimatums reminds us that genuine leadership is not defined by dominance, but by restraint. When Imbrahim entered that windowless room at the United Nations to face Trump and his hawkish advisor, John Barron, he did not come armed with weapons or withered diplomacy. He came with the U.S. Constitution, a symbol not only of legal restraint, but of principled governance. It was an act of psychological defiance, suggesting that even in the midst of pressure, a leader must remind the world that power has boundaries. From this, we learn that political power is not absolute. Even when one party holds the upper hand militarily or economically, the true measure of control lies in public legitimacy and moral credibility. Trump had media weapons and influence, but he lacked what Imbrahim had: public conscience. When Imbrahim walked away from the coercive negotiations, he planted a seed of resistance not just in political circles, but in the hearts of ordinary citizens. His refusal became a rallying cry for protesters across continents, proof that words still have the power to move people, even in a world ruled by missiles and propaganda. Another lesson we draw is the cost of internal dissent. While Trump posed an external threat, Imbrahim's true battlefield lay within his own country. His refusal to align with hardliners in Iran's Revolutionary Guard made him vulnerable not only to political assassination, but to spiritual condemnation. Being labeled a murtad, an apostate, was more than a religious charge. It was a death sentence wrapped in ideological betrayal. Yet Imbrahim did not flinch. This teaches us that reform, when sincere, often demands sacrifice from the reformer. Those who truly seek to change the system from within must be prepared to face abandonment from allies, betrayal from institutions, and isolation from public safety. Moreover, the episode underscores the power and peril of information warfare. Barron's manipulation of satellite images and his orchestration of media narratives shows how quickly public perception can be weaponized. Truth in such contexts becomes both fragile and dangerous. But Imbrahim's strategic counterattack, leaking the truth to international media, exposes a crucial insight. Transparency, when timed correctly, can dismantle empires of lies. The leak of the Barron file shifted global opinion, derailed the push for war, and forced even hawkish senators to pause. It proves that truth, though often buried, can still emerge as a formidable weapon when wielded with courage and clarity. This story also compels us to reconsider the role of fear in governance. Imbrahim had every reason to give in pressure from foreign superpowers, warnings from military generals, threats of impeachment and assassination plots. But his choice to face Parliament alone, to walk among his people without protection, was a declaration of fearlessness. He did not hide behind barricades or broadcast defiance from bunkers. He stood in plain sight, showing that a leader's strength lies in presence, not bravado. The public response, both within Iran and globally, revealed another truth: people are not passive. When mobilized around a cause rooted in justice, they become a force that even presidents must reckon with. Hashtags like United Against War protests in Washington and the revival of the War Powers Act reflect a deeper yearning in citizens to reclaim democratic control over foreign policy. In this sense, Imbrahim's resistance catalyzed not just a defense of national sovereignty, but a reawakening of democratic vigilance across borders. The lesson deepens when we consider the aftermath. Imbrahim did not win in the conventional sense. He was not celebrated as a victor in war. He received no parades, no accolades. His reforms moved slowly. His enemies remained in the shadows, and he eventually stepped down quietly. But he left behind a legacy rooted in dignity. By choosing not to strike, not to lie, and not to abandon his principles, he offered an alternative model of leadership, one that is humble, resilient, and enduring. This is perhaps the most enduring lesson. Not all victories are loud. Some are whispered into history. Some are etched in silence, in the absence of war, in the avoidance of bloodshed. When Imbrahim ended his final speech with the words, "I said no," when it mattered most, he encapsulated the essence of moral courage. Leadership is not about being remembered. It's about doing what's right, regardless of whether history applauds. Ultimately, the story serves as a warning and a guide. It warns us of the seductive ease with which leaders can use fear and misinformation to push nations into conflict. But it also guides us to believe that another way is possible, that reform and peace can coexist, even if they are fragile. Imbrahim's journey reminds us that to say no when everyone expects war is not weakness. It is wisdom. And in a world that too often confuses aggression with strength, we are reminded that restraint, true, principled restraint, may be the boldest act of all. As an African watching the world unfold its power games, the story of President Imbrahim is both familiar and haunting. It reminds me not only of our own history, scarred by colonial domination coups and puppet regimes, but also of our ongoing struggle, the fight for leaders who stand not for personal glory, but for their people's dignity. What Imbrahim did was not just an act of political resistance. It was spiritual resistance. When he said no to Donald Trump, when he refused to drag Iran into a war to satisfy another man's ego, he stood as a mirror to the very leadership Africa has long cried for. In that moment, he was not just speaking for Iran. He was speaking for every nation that has been bullied, manipulated, or coerced into violence for someone else's empire. I see Africa in Imbrahim's silence. I see our story in his isolation. How many times have our leaders been cornered in backroom deals, forced to choose between survival and sovereignty? How many times have they failed that test? But Imbrahim didn't. He stood in front of generals, clerics, foreign agents, and even his own people who doubted him. And he didn't waver. That is rare. That is sacred. And for a continent like mine, where history has too often been written by the loudest guns and the darkest money, this story offers more than inspiration. It offers a blueprint. The lesson is clear. The most powerful weapon a nation has is a leader who will not betray their conscience. In Africa, we've seen too many betrayals. We've seen leaders sell out resources, lives, and futures in exchange for short-term loans, military protection, or the illusion of global status. We've watched as our stories were rewritten by foreign media, as our heroes were painted as villains and our enemies dressed up as saviors. But Imbrahim turned the script upside down. He did not respond to propaganda with more propaganda. He didn't scream or threaten or posture. Instead, he leaked the truth. He let facts speak. He used the very system meant to destroy him, Western media, and made it tell the story it tried to bury. That is strategy. That is intelligence. That is what Africa needs more of, leaders who know how to fight without firing a gun. And yet his real battle wasn't with Trump. It was with his own house. That too is painfully familiar. On this continent, we know that the greatest threats often come from within, from military men who want power without ballots, from religious elites who speak of morality but lust for control, from opposition parties that don't care for policy but only for the next chance to strike. Imbrahim faced all of them and survived not because he crushed them, but because he exposed them. He dragged their lies into the light and made them defend the indefensible. For us Africans who have lived through decades of externally funded coups and CIA-backed assassinations, this story is not fantasy. It is warning. It tells us that if we do not protect leaders who speak with conscience, we will forever be ruled by those who speak with bullets. When Imbrahim walked through the market without guards, without ceremony, he was telling the world something important, that a leader must be where the people are, not where the power is. He could have stayed in his compound. He could have retreated, but he walked with his people. That's how trust is built. That's how nations heal. Too often in Africa, our leaders isolate themselves in palaces, guarded not only by soldiers, but by fear. Fear of the masses they promised to serve. Imbrahim's bravery was not just on the global stage. It was in those small moments, in the conversation with the baker, the handshake with the grandmother, the quiet warning to the children, "Don't let them trick you into loving war." That line for me was everything, because war has been sold to us in Africa, like a drug, packaged as liberation, painted as glory, whispered as destiny, but all it ever brings are graves. And too often it's not even our war. It's theirs. Their oil, their minerals, their interests, their fears. We just supply the bodies. But Imbrahim broke that cycle. He reminded us that refusing to fight can be more courageous than picking up the sword, and that when you say no at the right time to the right enemy for the right reasons, you are not weak. You are the beginning of something stronger. Yes, his enemies circled. Yes, bombs still fell. Yes, his government shook, but he stood. And because he stood, the world stepped back from the brink. Just enough, just in time. In Africa, we don't need perfect heroes. We need principled ones. Men and women who, when faced with impossible choices, still choose dignity, still choose truth, still choose peace, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Imbrahim may not be African by blood, but in spirit he is one of us, and his story must not be forgotten. Because every time a Western power demands our allegiance, every time we are told to choose between silence and suffering, we can look to this story and remember there is always a third path, a path of resistance, a path of honesty, a path where saying no becomes the loudest cry for freedom. And for a continent that has been silenced too long, that cry may be the beginning of our true independence. If there is one truth we Africans have learned through centuries of colonization, betrayal, and resistance, it is this: silence is never neutral. In the face of injustice, silence serves the aggressor. But Imbrahim was not silent. Even when his own people doubted him, Even when Western media painted him as indecisive, even when generals whispered of his downfall, he chose to speak not loudly, but with clarity, dignity, and resolve. That clarity echoes deeply with those of us in Africa, who have waited decades for a leader to say what so many fear to admit, that not every enemy wears foreign colors. That danger often wears the uniform of your own army, or the robes of your own religious leaders. That peace is not cowardice, and war is not strength. We have had our share of impostors leaders, who promise to stand for the people only to kneel before foreign banks, military deals, and multinationals. They wrap themselves in flags while selling national resources behind closed doors. Imbrahim's actions were a direct contrast to that legacy. He chose not to appease. He chose not to perform. He chose truth even when it threatened to cost him everything. The world today is not short of weapons. What it is short of is memory. We forget too quickly the cost of the last war, the trauma in the eyes of mothers, the silence of schoolyards turned into graveyards. Imbrahim refused to forget, and in doing so he forced the world to remember. That is perhaps his most important contribution, a restoration of historical memory. In Africa, too, our memories have been buried under skyscrapers, built with loan money under development projects that displace entire communities under military partnerships that turn sovereign soil into drone bases. We are told to forget, to move on, but we cannot, because every forgotten wound becomes a doorway for the next injustice. Imbrahim's resistance teaches us to remember and to act. When he stood in front of Parliament with the black envelope proof of a conspiracy crafted not just by foreign powers, but by his own military, it was not a gesture of survival. It was a declaration of ownership of his country, of his voice of the truth. That moment reminded me of Thomas Sankara, the Burkina Faso president, who said, "He who feeds you controls you." Imbrahim, like Sankara, refused to be fed lies. He refused to serve imperial agendas. And like Sankara, he knew the price of that refusal could be fatal, but he still said no. And that is why we must protect these kinds of leaders. Africa does not lack talent. It does not lack courage. What it often lacks is protection for those few who dare to lead with principle. We must build systems that defend integrity, not punish it. We must create cultures where a man like Imbrahim is not seen as an anomaly, but as a norm. That begins with us, the people. We must stop worshiping power and start demanding character. We must reject the idea that strength means brutality, or that progress means selling off what is ours. We must support leaders who speak truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Especially then, we must also learn from the mechanics of resistance. Imbrahim didn't just survive because he was morally right. He survived because he was strategically smart. He leaked at the right moment. He used global media against itself. He allowed truth to move faster than propaganda. That too is a lesson for Africa. Principles alone are not enough. We must pair them with strategy, with information, with organization. Let no African think this is someone else's story. Every time a foreign base is built on our land without our consent, this is our story. Every time a trade deal is signed that favors outsiders while starving our farmers, this is our story. Every time we are asked to take sides in a conflict that was not ours to begin with, this is our story. Imbrahim's resistance reminds us we do not have to choose between silence and surrender. We can choose defiance. We can choose dignity. Even in defeat, should it come, there is honor in having stood for something greater than oneself. That is what makes his legacy different. Not the fact that he avoided war, but the fact that he dared to hope for something better and was willing to pay the price for that hope. It is the same hope that filled the streets of Accra when Kwame Nkrumah shouted, "Africa must unite." The same hope that Nelson Mandela whispered to his cellmates on Robben Island. The same hope we still carry in the dusty roads of Bamako, Khartoum, Harare. A hope that says we are not pawns, we are not collateral, we are not servants of empire. We are people, sovereign, conscious, and worthy of writing our own history. Imbrahim didn't free Iran, but he showed the world what freedom looks like. And in doing so, he reminded Africa that the world does not only watch us fall. Sometimes it watches to see if we will rise. And if we do slowly, painfully, defiantly, then perhaps one day a child in Lagos or Luanda or Kigali will look up at a leader and say, "He didn't bend. So why should we?"